Welcome everyone. My name is Sarah Rice and I am the Editor-in-Chief of the Water Law Review, and we really appreciate everyone being here today. The Water Law Review, at its most basic function, publishes twice yearly scholarly articles on the topic of water law. But over the last 21 years, we've become so much more than that, not only through our online content, but through our community engagement, including the Symposium. Today we are honored to host the 11th Annual Symposium of the Water Law Review, and on such an important topic, we're happy to have such a huge discussion on it. I'd like to now turn it over to Ms. Lindsay Ratcliffe, who is the Symposium editor this year and the person in charge of putting on such a wonderful event today. So, thank you.
Hi everybody. As Sarah said, my name is Lindsay Ratcliffe. Welcome to the 11th Annual Denver Water Law Review Symposium. You've all received emails from me over the last few months, and I'm so grateful that today has finally arrived. So please, throughout today, pull me aside and introduce yourselves. Today's topic is a passion of mine, and I would love to hear your thoughts and ideas about how to continue the conversation beyond today. So we do expect 200 people here today throughout the session. So if you are a student here in room 165 and noticing any of our visiting professionals looking for a seat, I would appreciate it if you wouldn't mind going over to our overflow room in 155. And I really appreciate your flexibility on that. So first I want to thank our speakers who came from across the country to share with us their stories about how water law affects their clients as well as their communities. Understanding how water law promotes and in some cases prevents certain communities from fair access to water is essential to human dignity for all today and into the future. So thank you speakers for coming all this way. We appreciate your time and your contributions. Next, I want to express my gratitude for the sponsors this year. We received support from across the university, and that includes the Office of the Dean here at Sturm College of Law, the University of Denver's Interdisciplinary Research Incubator for the Study of Inequality, which is also known as iRise, the University of Denver Center for Sustainability, the Rocky Mountain Collective on Race, Place, and Law, and the Environmental and Natural Resource Law program here at the law school. And we also received support from the water law community here in Colorado, including the Wright Family Foundation, Berg, Hill, Greenleaf, Rashidi, Balcom and Green, Patrick Miller Noto, Otten Johnson, Robinson, Neff, and Raganetti, and the Colorado River District. So thanks to all the sponsors who made today possible. Now, if you're a social media buff, we do have a hashtag that you can use to share your thoughts and inspirations from today's discussions, which is hashtag WLR2018. And we're also live streaming the event. So if you know of anybody that wasn't able to join us today and want to sit in for a session, let them know that our link to the live stream is on our website. So now I think we can get started with the actual symposium, why we're all here. So I'm honored to pass the mic over to Professor Tom Romero, who will provide an overview of today's discussions. Professor Romero is an associate professor of law, affiliated faculty with the Department of History, and one of my greatest mentors. He teaches and researches legal history of the American West, Latinos and the law, school desegregation in multiracial contexts, as well as property, land use, and water law in the United States and Latin America. I was honored to be a part of Professor Romero's water law class this last semester, and I am continually impressed by his support and motivation to think critically about our law and how it affects people. So please join me in welcoming Professor Tom Romero.
Well, good morning, everybody. You all clean up better than my students on a Friday morning. It is such a wonderful honor to be here today. I want to start off by acknowledging a whole bunch of sort of people as well, and not just people, but sort of this place that we're able to have this conversation and the context of this conversation. Many of you know that the University of Denver sits on the former historic homelands of the Arapaho and the Cheyenne. On Monday at the University of Denver, we are going to have an official flag-raising ceremony to acknowledge and recognize the fact that we have dispossessed those peoples. And by being here and by recognizing their place and their connection, we're going to make a historic commitment and a long-going future commitment to understand that our work here is connected to the work of the Arapaho and Cheyenne and indigenous peoples around the nation and the world. So I think that's a really important piece, an important step of how this symposium is part of a larger conversation that's happening on campus and why so much of this work is being supported by the larger campus initiatives. I wear many hats at this university. One of the hats is I'm a proud undergraduate alum of the University of Denver. I've been here on the faculty since 2010. I have been conscripted into service by the larger university. I get to serve as an assistant provost in our Office of Diversity and Inclusion. And it's really kind of that context that I wanted to get us started with the symposium today. Before doing that, I did want to finish my thank yous. There's others that I want to thank that aren't in the room as well. All the people that put together all the wonderful food that you'll be having throughout the day, the custodial staff, the maintenance staff that gives us the honor and the privilege to study and to have these ideas on this beautiful campus. We couldn't do their work without them, and so I want to acknowledge them. We're going to have more later today, and we're going to be honoring one of my colleagues who left us way too suddenly back in the spring, Professor Federico Cheever. The ideas that are part of this symposium are ones that, since I've known him, and I knew Professor Cheever when I was a graduate student back at the University of Michigan back in the late 1990s. And as a graduate student at the University of Michigan, I was working on this project involving the San Luis Valley. And I was here in Denver at the time, and I just knocked on his door in the middle of the summer. And he happened to be there. And he happened to spend the next 2 hours with this person he didn't even know, telling me all about the San Luis Valley, a place that my family's from, but really sort of unpackaging with me the issues that were connected to water and voting rights and property and land use. I mean, connecting all these pieces together. And that's something that was part of Professor Cheever's DNA. It certainly inspired me as I became, moved into academia as an academic. And so this conference, where we're at as a university, is really a testament to him, and we're going to have some time to honor him later today. And finally, you got a bit of a sense of this, but the work of this symposium, many of you know, particularly that aren't students, right, that this is the work of students. This is the vision of people like Lindsay and Sarah, who want to bring people into this space to have interesting conversations, tough conversations, and conversations that move us forward. And that takes a lot of courage, takes a lot of dedication, and certainly takes a lot of work. The work that these students do to put on these conferences is first rate, and I've been extremely honored to be associated as a faculty advisor with the Water Law Review with the work that they do. So thank you, Lindsay and Sarah. So give a big hand. And all the students. So I was asked as part of my welcome to give us a little context, kind of set us up a little bit for how we want to think about approaching the issues that we're going to be having today. As I suggested, as I indicated, some of these issues take courage to talk about, because many of us that deal with these issues, particularly in Colorado, but throughout the arid American and North American West, know that we tend to deflect from these issues, just like we do in the rest of the country. And we tend to think about things, we talk about issues like racial inequality or gender inequality or class inequality, we tend to deflect, right? We tend to want to sort of shy away from those tough conversations. And I think a lot of the reasons we do that is we don't necessarily have a common language or a common framework in which to approach these sorts of issues. So that's kind of what my goal is today in a few minutes here, is to give us a framework in which we can begin to engage with the ways we're going to be talking about equity and equality and diversity in its myriad of forms and how it comes together in terms of water law. And all of this is going to come back to the theme of the conference, forging sovereignty, self-determination, and solidarity through water law. It's about coalition building. It's about recognizing and respecting communities that have oftentimes been marginalized in a variety of ways. And at the end of the day, it's about finding common ground and moving forward, I think, together. So let me give you some common language. Some of this language is going to come from some of the work that I do with the large university, with teachers, not just in this university, but around the country, about how do we talk about these issues in the classroom. How do we talk about these issues in the classroom? So one of the most important things that I want you all to get comfortable with is being uncomfortable. All right? That's like 101 with this work, right? We are going to be uncomfortable, and if you're not uncomfortable, we're not doing the hard work. We're not asking the hard questions. All right? So start to feel comfortable being uncomfortable. And tied to that, of course, and just what I mentioned, is how do we begin to build these bridges? What are the points of common ground, right? What are the points of common ground in which we can begin to work together towards common outcomes? And those of you that do water, right, this is also antithetical to what we think about. Water is about conflict, right? We see that prototypical picture of people fighting over a ditch with that gun and water rights, right? So I've had the privilege and the honor of teaching water law here since 2010, and I've had the privilege and honor to work with many of you in the room to come into my classroom to talk about your expertise in water law. And each and every one of you have all said, this next generation, in particular to the students, you all need to change things, right? You all need to change things. And in terms of how we talk with each other, how we begin to work more collaboratively, how we begin to think about things in different sorts of ways and through different sorts of lenses and perspectives. So very quickly, I want to give you a couple things. Take a look at this picture. Take a look at this picture and just sort of think about it here. This picture represents 3 different ways we can think about these terms that we're going to be coming back to throughout the course of the day. Equality, equity, and inclusion. So I know we're being taped, so I got to stay rooted here. I usually walk around the classroom a lot, but I love participation. Anyone here want to explain what you're seeing on the screen?
Get rid of the wall.
All right, get rid of the wall, right? Get rid of the wall. Get rid of the wall, you do what? You put people on the field, right? Other thoughts and reactions to this?
In the first picture, each of them gets equal treatment. They get the same box. In the second picture, they get an equitable treatment. They each get a box according to their needs.
Okay.
And then inclusion is, you guys are on the field being included, or one's not included. So
They don't need a box.
They don't need a box. A couple things, right? So in the equality piece, right? When they're each getting a box, what does that do? You say everybody gets the same box, right?
Right.
So what's the problem with that?
You keep your
One person still
advantage.
can't see.
One person still can't see, right? The tall person still gets to be able to see over the fence, right? That's right. And some of this is we take down the fence. Other quick thoughts on this?
The last deals with the system and the former to focus on individuals.
Okay. The last two are focused. What's the system? What's representative of the system?
I would say the wall.
Okay, the wall. The wall is the system. The game itself, right? Baseball game. Why are we even in the baseball game in the first place, right? Why are we in a baseball game in the first place? Maybe you think about that as the water law system. I like how you think about that in systemic terms. What about this one? This is kind of a different take on the same set of pictures. Now what jumps out?
They're actually in the game.
They're actually more in the game, right? Much closer to the field, right? Much closer to the action.
They're not confined.
They're not confined. We break down to that wall, right? Break down that wall.
There's room for new ideas specifically embedded in the structure of the picture.
Tell me more.
So there's a whole fourth of it left for a new idea, so maybe it doesn't have to be.
Oh, I love it, right? We could do that. That last, there's the slide there to think about. Maybe we don't need to be playing this game in the first place.
They're all
right?
doing different things.
They're all doing different things, right?
The little
Cheering.
person looks increasingly happier.
To be on the field, right?
They're able to do what they're doing in the liberation slide versus the one before it, when it was just inclusion, which implicates that they're just there. Liberation is more freedom,
Okay.
movement.
Okay. So they don't have, there's not these barriers, right? There's not these restrictions. And there's a celebration for doing, as I think somebody suggested, they can do what they want, right? They can do what they want. And of course, imagine new possibilities.
They have more of an audience, they might take a knee.
Okay. Might take a knee? By being on the field, right? What does that mean? What does that mean?
That they could move into being participants as well as observers.
Okay. Right. I think that's a very important line. Very quickly. One other thing I think is obvious, at least to me, that jumps out.
They're not white.
They're not white, right? The skin color. The skin color. And I think that's a real interesting, I think, piece here too. So as we begin to think of these terms, and I'm going to roll through these pretty quick, I'll have you read these as I'm talking a little bit, is how and in what ways we think about these models: equality, equity, inclusion, liberation, justice, right? These are all terms that sometimes are used synonymously, but I want to suggest, I want to indicate they're very different terms, right? And to the extent that we're trying to find common ground, I think the common ground we're trying to find is situated around questions of equity and of justice, and not necessarily just of equality. And these are some examples that we give, that I give, and others have give, in terms of thinking about the ways we can think about some of these terms, right? It's not just about counting numbers, right? It's just not about making sure someone's at the table and saying, okay, we've done our work. But it's about once you get people to the table, then how does that work actually become much harder, right? To achieve certain sorts of ways that we all come at this work differently. So I'll put this one final, let you all read this one slide here, and I'll put one final slide up here. This is what I want us to take away today. I put the first bullet point in quotes, and some of you might be familiar with this. This comes from Justice O'Connor in the Grutter and Grass cases from the University of Michigan, challenging their affirmative action programs. And all of you know that Justice Sandra Day O'Connor is a born and bred Westerner herself, right? Grew up on a ranch in Arizona. She dealt very, in her childhood with these issues of water access and water equity and water equality. I think in that case, she identified this fact that when it comes to these social categories and these differences that we have in our society, race still matters. Race still matters in the United States. So I think that's an organizing framework in which we need to acknowledge that and think through how we continue to move us forward within that. The second bullet point that I have up here, oftentimes when we're talking about our most marginalized communities, oftentimes when we're talking about communities that don't seem to have access, the discussion around these communities is done so from a deficit-based model. So when I talk about this, and when others have talked about this, it's all the ways that these communities don't have certain sorts of things, like the right type of culture or the right type of familial structures, right? And that is a language and a framework that doesn't move the needle much. It's been a language that's been going on for at least 40 years. And what's emerged, particularly with those that are working with diverse communities, is to understand these communities are asset-based. There's all sorts of ways that each of these communities have wonderful resources, whether it's culture, whether it's familial structures, right, that go back decades, that go back centuries. So as we approach ways that we begin to think about bringing in diverse communities into our conversations and think about doing work on behalf of diverse communities, we need to understand this from an asset-based perspective, A, B, C, D. And I think going to the third and final bullet point, that's then tied to this idea of community action, community-engaged action. We need to be thinking constantly about how we engage communities. And this is tough, because oftentimes we don't know how to engage communities. We don't have contacts. We don't have ways that we can build bridges. And so I think as we begin to think of this work in water law generally, how and in what ways we can begin to identify what are communities that are going to be affected and how do we engage them, right? And if we don't know how to engage them, who do we need to partner with in order to engage with them? And I'll leave this with my final point. The University of Denver, the Sturm College of Law, can play an important role in that regard. I mean, that's a role that we historically have been able to do. We want to do it, so we want to work with all of you. If you don't know how to work with these communities and in sort of diverse and sophisticated ways, we're happy to do that with you. So without further ado, I want to turn it to our first panel today. So thank you all for being here and looking forward to the conversation.